and I'm coming at you from not my studio today because I wanted to do something a little bit differently. I wanted to gab while I complete some pieces, but I can't gab to you with a respirator on, so I figured I'd do it outside, have fresh air, have the fan blowing, so hopefully I can still avoid lead poisoning. You girls don't get lead poisoning. So obviously I'm trying to build this presence, this online presence of Zillennial Hippie that revolves around connecting through art based on social justice. And I often expect myself to, well, I always expect myself to handle things perfectly, which is, I'm learning, unrealistic. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of, I've worked really hard. I'm finally at this point in my life where I have the opportunity to make my dreams come true. And I'm afraid that I'm gonna fail me. I'm also afraid that I'm gonna embarrass the hell out of myself to the whole wide world. It's a scary thing. So part of me being here today is to just fight through that perfectionist paralysis. Another reason I'm here today is to gab with the gals and guys and gays, whoever's here. All are welcome as long as you're not an asshole. The world sucks right now. America is a really scary place. Every day we turn on the news and there's a new horror that awaits us. Another attack on LGBTQ and innocent children who simply want to feel themselves in their own bodies. We wake up to hissy-fitting man children having a Twitter battle. And these are the men that run our country. We essentially get confirmation that Trump's in the Epstein files, allegedly. Not trying to get sued. It's no surprise. We see Greta Thunberg's aid ship get intercepted from helping out innocent Palestinians. We see our neighbors get shot with rubber bullets and beat with batons because they're practicing their First Amendment right to protest and stand up for their rights, their community, humanity. When I started Zillennial Hippie, I told myself I was going to create a space for these conversations. And I haven't really yet. And the truth is that I'm really fucking scared. First of all, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to begin. There's so much that demands our attention and our outrage and our conversation and our action and our resistance. I don't know where to begin. There's not enough time to fight all of the injustice in the world. But you gotta start somewhere. And you gotta start sometime. So, today is that day for me. I'm reading this book right now, written by Amanda Montell, I believe is her name. It's called The Age of Magical Overthinking, Notes on Modern Irrationality. I'll link it below. And I've learned a lot. the book itself is filled with all sorts of scientifically backed psychological studies that have been published in scientific journals, are respected and acknowledged and validated by scientists all around the world. One of the studies that has stood out to me is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And essentially what that is the tendency for us humans, the tendency for humans that know the littlest about a topic tend to assume they know the most, or at least enough to warrant speaking on a topic. I don't know if you've noticed this about me, but I am white. I am a palm-colored person. I've done the DNA test, and I'm about, like, genetically as white as one can possibly get. I also don't have an accent that might suggest that I immigrated here from another country. I am also able-bodied. I am straight presenting. So, in reading this book, I've, wondered if part of my paranoia or part of my procrastination in engaging in these conversations or fostering a space for these types of conversations, part of my concern or part of my paranoia is that I might be falling into that ego tendency that our brains tend to have. I don't have the lived experience of so many marginalized individuals. So who am I to talk about it, right? Well, I've made the decision that that kind of logic keeps me stuck, keeps me immobile and not playing my part. Zillennial Hippie is all about creating meaning out of this moment in our lives right now. This moment in American and global history. So I might not be a person of color. I might not be trans. I might not be an immigrant. But I'm human. And we're all human. And I think that gives me and you and us the right to talk about the inhumanity that we see in the world. America was founded by individuals and for individuals fleeing financial and religious and social prosecution. The origin story of our country is strikingly similar to the origin story of a lot of immigrants who are coming to the United States looking for a better life. I think if you fancy yourself a proud American or a patriot, you should be absolutely outraged by what we're seeing happening right now in our country, specifically LA, because not only are their stories uniquely American, the neighbors and allies that are protesting alongside them, on behalf of them, are exercising their first American right, our freedom of speech, our freedom of assembly. And if you're outraged enough by gun control and that sensible gun control regulation interferes with your fundamental right to your Second Amendment, you should be equally as outraged by what's happening in the streets of LA right now when the President of the United States dispatches active military against American citizens. That is fundamentally un-American. I went on a little mini road trip with my mom the other day. My mom is as boomer as you get. Born in 1952, Ohio, Midwest, and she's chronically on Facebook, despite my best efforts to get her off. So, what that naturally means these days is that she is often inundated with either false or deceptive or simply just rage bait headlines. But bless her boomer little heart, she wants to understand. So she asked me, what about the looting that's going on in LA after dark? To which I had many responses. It was a narrative in 2020 during the BLM and George Floyd RIP protests, and it's a narrative now. It's a narrative that's used by the right to deflect. That way, we're focused on the wrongdoings of the people protesting. We're not protesting right. We're more concerned about how morally ethical the protests are being executed than the morality of why we are protesting to begin with. We're protesting to begin with because American citizens are being taken off the streets. We're protesting to begin with because children and parents are being ripped away from each other. And why? My father-in-law, bless his boomer little heart, says something to the effect of, people have a right to come here. They just need to come here in the right way. I get it. His parents did it the right way. What is the right way, though? How can you define a right way when migration is literally a human behavior that has existed for all of time? How can you determine a right way when the borders of this country have been both arbitrarily and illegally seized from other countries and other peoples to begin with? Who decides what's right? The white people. Just because some white people make a decision doesn't make it the right decision. Another thing that these rage bait looting headlines often seem to overlook, that businesses have insurance. They're probably going to get a check right to them that protects their revenue and their bottom line. There's no insurance for the families that are torn apart. There's no payout. They just suffer. For the rest of their lives, they carry that trauma. Who knows if they'll ever be able to see their parents or their children again? So again, I ask, what's right? What makes one more right than another? I want to have this conversation today, despite my fear of saying the wrong thing or saying it the wrong way or being perceived as performative. I want to have this conversation today because we can't normalize this. The livelihood of Americans, of this country, fundamentally hinges on whether we normalize people getting seized off the streets or not. Whether we normalize militant policing of Americans exercising their constitutional right. I want to have this conversation today to have a conversation where we are able to remind ourselves that this isn't normal and it shouldn't be normal and we mustn't normalize it. Let's be honest, the businesses that may or may not be looted, they're going to be okay. They're going to get that payout. So if they're going to be okay, then what? Are the people going to be okay? At what point do we prioritize humanity our own humanity over revenue. Another thing I learned in this book is that I'm going to try to summarize this in the right way. I might be making a few, might not be articulating it exactly as how it was described, but essentially, the concept of money wasn't standardized until the Industrial Revolution. That means, like, I don't know, when was the Industrial Revolution? 1880s? Sometime around there. All this talk of the economy, money, revenue, tariffs, they're all constructs. You know, it's not an artificial construct. Health, community, well-being, knowledge, those things are real. Those things are what make our time on this planet valuable, meaningful. We're sold this narrative that without money, without enough money, without a certain amount of money, you haven't succeeded. Maybe you're even a failure. Yeah. The older I get, the more life I live, the more I'm realizing that narrative says a lot more about the system that we live in than our achievements as human beings. When I was in college, I took a class on all things Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. I read The Hobbit, I read all of The Lord of the Rings. So I dove into the world of Middle-earth. And I really fell in love. I really fell in love with the story, the lore, the legend, the layers, the artistry, the messages, both subtle and blatant. And to this day, my partner and I, it's like one of our go-tos, like turn our brain off, fall asleep, watching Lord of the Rings. These little hobbits who are the size and kind of emotional intelligence of like 12-year-olds, of children, are tasked with the mission of destroying the Ring of Power. What's striking about that is that hobbits don't like adventure. Hobbits like their peaceful little community in Hobbiton. And in fact, when Frodo and Bilbo went on their adventures, they were actually labeled disturbers of the peace. Because Hobbiton, you know, we're just focused on eating our second breakfast, levensies, dinner, and supper. Don't bring that mess into our community. Don't, like, it's nap time. Don't disturb the peace. But the peace needed to be disrupted in order to save their lives, in order to save the lives of their community, in order to save the lives of all of the beings in Middle-earth from the fires of industry. And my God, do the metaphors that were written post World War II apply like hell today? So while it's easy to look at these rage bait headlines and say, oh, but these protesters, they're going about it in the wrong way. There's violence and looting and da da da. They're disruptors of the peace. But maybe the same lesson applies here. Maybe the peace needs to be disrupted in order to save us all. In order for peace to be preserved and protected for the future.